Okay, number 31. This is going to be a comparative absolute advantage problem. According to the information in the table above, which of the following statements is true if both countries have the same number of workers? Okay, let's take a look at the table and see what's going on. So country A can make 100 units of manufactured goods and 300 units of service goods. So we see that they have, you can make a ratio of 1 to 3. So for country A, one manufactured good is equal to 3 service goods because they're in the ratio of 100 to 300. Now country B, you can see the ratio is going to be one manufactured good for every 2 service goods because the ratio at country B is 75 to 150 or 2 to 1. And I write it like this so you could see the relative value of each. 1m is 3s and 1m equals 2s for B. So if you're in country A, you have to give up 3 of your services to get just 1m. But in country B, you can give up only 2 to get 1. So country A desires the m much more than it desires the s's. Now in country B, it's the same way, where they'd have to give up 2 to get 1, right? But giving up 2 to get 1 is not nearly as bad as giving up 3 to get 1 in country A. So M is more valuable in country A than it is in country B. So since M is more valuable in country A, it's got a comparative advantage in services. And that means if they have a comparative advantage in services, then country B's got the comparative advantage in manufactured goods. So country A would be glad to trade services for manufactured goods. So A's comparative advantage is in services, and B's comparative advantage is in manufactured goods. Now what about absolute advantage? So if we take a look at country A, it could always make more manufactured goods than B, and it can make more service goods than B for the same number of hours worked and the same number of laborers. So country A has an absolute advantage in both goods. Okay, so let's look at the choices and see what makes sense. Country A has both an absolute and a competitive advantage in manufactured goods. That's not right because B has the comparative advantage in manufactured goods. Country A has an absolute advantage in manufactured goods, but a comparative advantage in service goods. See, that's exactly what we described, that country A has an absolute advantage in manufactured and service goods, but it also has a comparative advantage in service goods. So that would be a correct choice. Let's take a look at the other ones just to make sure. Country B has a comparative advantage in service goods. We know that's not true. Their comparative advantage is in manufactured goods. Country A has an absolute advantage in service goods, but a comparative advantage in manufactured goods. And that's opposite. We know that country A has a comparative advantage in the service goods. And then finally, country B has an absolute advantage in manufactured goods, and right away we know they have no absolute advantage, so that is also wrong. So here we get the choice is B. Okay, number 32. Which of the following would most likely result in a decrease in the equilibrium price of orange? Okay, so just taking a look at our normal supply and demand curve, what are the things that are going to make a price decrease, right? So if demand decreased, right, if demand decreases, then here we would definitely see a lowering of the price. And if the supply increased, we would also see a lowering of the price. So we know the answer to this question has to be either supply increasing or demand decreasing. Okay, with that, let's take a look at the choices. Choice A, the weather during this orange growing season is not good as it was last year. So does that will decrease the supply, and if the supply decreases, we're going to have an increase in price, so that is not a good choice. B, the price of apples, a substitute for oranges, is higher this year than last year. So if there's if apples have a higher price, then people are going to buy more oranges, which means it's going to increase the demand for oranges, which is exactly the reverse of what we're looking for. Okay, a new study suggests that oranges contain trace of cancer-causing substances due to pesticide residue. Well, here, that's going to decrease the demand for oranges, and that's what we're looking for. A decrease in demand will lower the price, so that's correct. Okay, we'll look at the other choices just to make sure. A tree-killing fungus spreads through orange orchards. That's the same as B, or actually A, where the supply goes down, and if the supply goes down, we're going to have an increase in price, so that would be incorrect. And finally, firms in the orange industry launch You can't see it here, but they launch an effective advertising campaign. And that would increase in demand, which is the opposite of what we're looking for. So here the choice is C. Okay, number 33. If a severe drought destroys a significant portion of the peanut crop and peanut farmers' revenues increase, which of the following is true over the observed price range of prices? So let's just go over a couple of terms before we take a look at the choices. Now this holds for both supply and demand curves. When we talk about a curve being inelastic, it's completely vertical. When something's inelastic, you'll have a very large change in price for very small changes in quantity. And then a horizontal curve would be called perfectly elastic. I really should call this perfectly inelastic when it's completely upright. And this means that the price is just not going to change very much no matter what happens to the quantity. And then between perfectly inelastic and perfectly elastic, you have everything in between. Now, when the slope is exactly 45 degrees, that means that for every one change in quantity, you get one change in price, one unit change in both. This curve has a special name, and they call that unit elasticity. So curves that start in this region, or at least demand curves that start in this region with the yellow, you'd call them mostly elastic. Perfectly elastic going to unit elastic, and then in the green portion of the curve, you start to have, you describe the demand curve more as inelastic, going to being perfectly inelastic when it's vertical. So for elastic curves, quantity changes don't cause big price changes. And conversely, in inelastic curves, quantity changes result in big price changes. All right, with that in mind, let's go back to the problem. And we see that it was a severe drought, so we know the peanut crop was reduced dramatically. And yet somehow the farmer's revenue increased, right? So the farmer's revenue increased. So the only way you could have a smaller quantity and have an increase in revenue is to have the price change dramatically. The price must have gone up for the farmer tremendously. So we know if the price has changed tremendously, we know we have an inelastic demand for the product. Okay, so let's go to the choices. The demand for peanuts must be unit price elastic. So we know that's not true. A unit price elasticity would have meant that for every bit he didn't produce, his price would have went down. I'm sorry, the price would have gone up, but up by the same amount. So his net revenue would have been the same with unit price elasticity. Okay, choice B, the demand for peanuts must be price elastic. So price elastic means the price doesn't change very much, but we just said the price had to have changed enormously to make more revenue on less quantity, so that is also incorrect. Choice C, the demand for peanuts must be price inelastic. Well, that's exactly what we're looking for, that there was a change in the quantity, the price must have gone up enormously, so it was price inelastic, so that is a correct choice. And just to look at the other two, the supply of peanuts must be price inelastic. Well, we don't know anything about the elasticity of the supply, we just know that there was a drought and we produced less of it, so that's not really relevant. And here's the opposite, that the price must be elastic. Again, we don't know anything about the supply curve's elasticity other than the fact that there was a drought that destroyed the crops. So the correct choice for 33 is C. Okay, number 34. Promoters of a rock group know that if they charge $8 a ticket, 400 people would buy tickets for a concert, and if they charge $4 a ticket, 800 people would buy tickets. So look how perfect this is. If they halve the price of the ticket, they double the amount of people who come. So that is exactly what we described under number 33, where it's a unit elasticity. So in other words, if you double a price, you halve the quantity, or if you halve the price, you double the quantity. So they change in lockstep with one another, and that's a great example of unit elasticity. And we don't even really have to go over all the choices. We know right away that the choice for that will be C.